over to you.
Well, I'm going to answer that more or less as a psychologist. So, one of the tenets of clinical therapy, including psychiatry in its, say, non-medical forms, is that dialogue is curative. That's actually the fundamental proposition. And the thing about having someone in therapy is, you know, they're often, like everyone, bent, out of shape quite badly, sometimes homicidal, sometimes homicidal's good enough, and hurt and vengeful, and you know, and for good reason often. No joke. Good reason. If you were in their shoes, you'd feel the same way in all probability. You have to let those people talk. You have to let them talk. They don't even know what they think until they talk. You know, you think, and then you talk. It's like, no, you don't. You know, most people can't think at all, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It's very, very difficult to learn to think, because to think, you have to hold an argument between two opposing positions in your own head. You have to delineate both positions, and you have to make, like, not a straw man out of either. You want to make, in Sam Harris's term, an Iron Man out of both, and then you have to do that alone. It's like, yeah, maybe you can do that if you're Dostoevsky, but because he's the only person I've seen who's really managed that consistently. But to expect anything other than an unbelievably well-trained mind to even step into that territory is naive beyond belief. Almost everyone thinks by talking. They don't even know what they think until they speak. And so often, if you let people speak, they'll speak and they'll say, you know, and then they become aware of some internal contradictions, or maybe they shock themselves. That happens a lot. It's like, oh, I can't believe I said that. And they hear what they have to say. They reveal themselves to themselves. Geez, that just enough right there is often enough to change them. But even if it isn't, let's say they're particularly intransigent, and we're not debating about whether hate speech exists, because bloody well right, it exists, and it can be unbelievably pathological, and I think I'm actually quite familiar with that sort of thing. But you want that out in the air so that people can hear it. You want to drive the people who hate underground? We know what happens psychologically when you do that. It's a very bad idea. Anything you drive underground thrives. It thrives. And it partly thrives because it isn't even allowed to express itself, and then it festers and turns into hatred that far exceeds the original. And the idea that you make society safe by not letting horrible people say terrible things is it's not a good proposition. You want those people out in the open where they can say what they have to say. First of all, so they can see what they're like. Second of all, so that they can see how people respond, because you don't even know what you should think in some sense until you watch how people respond. You know, well, I won't go on and on about that, but and then the question, there's other questions. Who defines hate? Geez, that's a deadly one. It's like, it's great if you're on the left and the left is in power, because the left defines hate, but they're not going to be in power forever, man. And as soon as the people who are on the opposite side come into power, they're going to use whatever arguments you had and their own, and whatever you think is going to be hate speech, like, right now. So you should always, and this is what the founders of the American Constitution did, you know, they always thought, okay, how could an absolute malevolent fool screw this up? They never thought, well, how can we establish the utopia? So that's what you're always thinking when you're putting a limit on something, including someone else's speech. It's like, okay, how could the most malevolent fool imaginable screw this up the worst possible way? And then presume that will happen. And then take steps so that that isn't how it turns out. So you ought to let the people who have horrifying viewpoints express them, you know, subject to these limitations, because you want to make them into martyrs. That's what happened with I can't say it properly, Geert Wilders.
Keatsra.
No, the Dutch guy.
Yeah, the Dutch, who's leading the polls, by the way, and who has a pretty decent chance of winning the election. They nailed him for hate speech, and his popularity went up like 4%. It's like, doesn't seem like a very smart move to me, but I'm sure he's not too unhappy about it. You know, and it might be that the fate of the EU rests on his shoulders. Maybe not. Maybe it's Marine Le Pen.
In the